This is the DMB Report Podcast for August 2016, where you are covered and smothered in everything college football. Welcome to the DMB Report Podcast for August 2016, where you are covered and smothered in everything college football. Welcome, everyone, to the podcast. This is actually podcast number 2. My name is Dan Bennett, your host. I'll always joined with my counterpart, DMB Report senior writer David Dorsey. Dave, it's time for some football.
Man, Dan, it's been a long off season. It seems like, the last time we did this was several months ago, and we were just really excited to talk about recruiting and National Signing Day. And it seems like that was in some ways just yesterday and some days, a year ago. But man, I tell you what, I am ready for some football. I'm ready to talk about this first weekend of huge games and a little bit more diving into the SEC. So thank you for having me. I'm glad to be back on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to another great season of football.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting, and it's one of these rare treats you and I have discussed, offline. I mean, September 3rd is just a bunch of awesome football games. You can kind of tell the college football playoff effect with strength of schedule, and obviously what we're going to focus in on today is some of the SEC games, 5 to be exact. But you couldn't ask for a better slate of games. It's almost better not to be at one of these games so you can sit up with the big screen TV and take a look at what's going on. But it's going to be awesome. I look forward to discussing it with you. So I figured we'd start out in order of when these games kick off. So September 3rd at 3:30 p.m., we have number 5 LSU at Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Big deal. Taking on the Wisconsin Badgers. This is the first time the Badgers have ever gotten to play at Lambeau Field, so I know it's a huge deal for them. My question to you, Dave, is do they have a chance?
Well, I tell you what, if you're a fan of Big Ten football or any, team up there in that area, certainly in Wisconsin, how awesome is this? Getting to play at Lambeau Field and you're hosting it. And it's not like, Northeastern State. I mean, this is LSU coming to town. I think this game is going to be a bloodbath, a physical battle in the trenches. I mean, Wisconsin is always, even before Bielema was there, they've always been a pound it team, run it between the tackles, man up, man on man, hat on hat, and let's see who is just bigger and badder. And I expect this game to be very much that same way. At the end of the day, I think it will be a fourth quarter game, but LSU's got Leonard Fournette and Wisconsin does not. And I think at the end, it will just be too much Fournette. It'll be a great stage for him to kick off his Heisman campaign. And I think LSU wins it by about a touchdown with a lot of Leonard Fournette, over 100 yards, a lot of Leonard Fournette, especially in that fourth quarter, running the clock out.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think, the home field advantage for them maybe gets Wisconsin 3 points, somewhere 2.5 to maybe 3 points, kind of head start thing, if you want to say that. But I think you're right. I think LSU is just going to be too much. Wisconsin is just going to face a beast with, they're built for Big Ten football where they play a lot of power running backs and kind of I formation type things. But they're going to see nothing like this. I mean, Leonard Fournette, I expect, is really going to have his way, really wearing them down in time. I see it being anywhere over a 10-point game. I just don't think Wisconsin can hang in there. And, we'll see what Les Miles does and Cam Cameron. If they're going to open this offense up like everybody's talking about, it'll be interesting to see what this LSU team could do, because if they are able to do something and really show something in that first week that might be different from their MO for the past, 7-8 years, they could definitely be a force to reckon with, not only in the SEC but nationally. But I just think it's going to be a great atmosphere. It's going to be awesome. But then after that, I think it's going to be all LSU. So I agree with you there.
Well, and the last thing, as you alluded to with Cam Cameron getting a little more creative with the offense, obviously the LSU quarterback is going to be key on this. Can he develop from last year? And speed. LSU's got plenty of speed. Wisconsin's not known for speed. So I think at the end of the day, if Cameron can dial up and get those playmakers, get them the ball in space, right, I think Wisconsin's not going to have enough in the fourth quarter to hold them off.
All right, Dave, next we've got at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, the Georgia Bulldogs, number 18 Georgia Bulldogs, facing North Carolina, number 22 ranked in the country. This is going to be an interesting matchup. Kirby Smart's first game, a lot of expectations, right or wrong, with him coming in here. We got, a lot of storylines with the quarterbacks against a good UNC team. This is a team that's not that different from the Coastal Division winners last year playing Clemson in the ACC championship game. What's your take on this one?
Well, I'd say this one scares me a lot if I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan. You've got an explosive UNC offense going up against an experienced UGA secondary, but not very experienced in the front seven. I think if this is a Mark Richt coached team in this game, I think that Georgia finds a way to lose this game. I think this is just one of those early season games with a very tough opponent that Georgia just in the past just didn't show up for. And I think what you always saw in a Nick Saban coach team was the ability to get a team ready in these early season big time matchups. And I expect nothing different from Kirby. I think you're going to see Grayson Lambert come out as the starter. And I think he will do what he does, which is not make mistakes. You're going to get a lot of Nick Chubb and hopefully some Sony Michel as well if he can come back from the forearm injury. And I think, again, another fourth quarter game. The hometown atmosphere will help the Bulldogs, and Nick Chubb will go over 100 yards, and it'll be just too much on the ground for UNC. I think Georgia wins it by about 4 late in the game.
Yeah, I agree with the assessment there of the scoring. I think it's going to be closer than what the Dogs fans are going to want it to be, especially for his first game. But the Tar Heels are a legit, competitor in this game, and I think could be a situation early. What they don't want to have Georgia have happen is, and Georgia's no slouch on defense. They might be thin across the defensive line currently, but they've definitely got some experience. But UNC is going to come out there and start slinging it around. They just got to kind of weather the storm because I think North Carolina is going to try to test the defensive backs early and try to jump on them early. What Georgia doesn't want to have happen is all of a sudden it's 14-0. And the UNC offense can definitely do that, with the right breaks, while Georgia's still trying to figure out how they're going to run, how they're going to go about it, especially with the quarterback situation. I agree with you, but I think Jacob Eason's going to come in at some point in that game and play. I mean, he's a big time recruit. Everybody's looking forward to seeing what he can do. But I agree with you. I think it's going to be close, but I definitely think it should be a game the Dogs win.
Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point. I do think at some point Georgia could be behind in this game. I think it could be very early, like you mentioned. Carolina gets on them, has a couple of big plays. Georgia's MO is going to be, slow and steady, a lot of handoff to the running backs, pound and ground, and they're not going to throw it 40 times. And I think it could be a situation where Georgia does get down, but if the fans can hang in there, Kirby's defense will bow its head. They're very talented in the front seven. They're just not very experienced. And I think that we will be able to get some pressure. The Dogs will be able to get some pressure. Again, Georgia's strength is the secondary. So that should make a Dog fan feel a little bit better. Georgia may be behind early, but they're going to pull it out late, probably with a long Nick Chubb touchdown run that'll have the fans jumping out of their seats.
Yeah, I think Kirby gets a W there, which would be definitely a nice start, especially with all the build-up. Be definitely good in the Georgia Dome, and should be exciting. So I can't wait to see what they do. I think it's going to be great. So let's move on. We're going to move out to Jerry's World at 8 p.m. We've got number 20, Southern California, versus number 1, Alabama. For Bama, this isn't anything new for them doing at Dallas, Texas Stadium there, because they opened up there last year. They played the semifinal game against Michigan State last year there, and they were there again a few years back playing Michigan Wolverines. And it's one of those things where for Alabama, this could be an interesting thing. The first 22 for USC is pretty good. They got great skill people, but really the depth after that is where it gets questioned. And all reports is Alabama's defense is supposed to be as good or better than it was last year. Now, that doesn't always happen the first game. And they've got a lot of question marks as well coming with quarterback, trying to figure out who the starting quarterback is going to be. I think it's going to be very similar to a Georgia situation where you have Cooper Bateman probably starts. Jalen Hurts, the young freshman dual threat quarterback that's been getting a lot of plug, will probably be in that game at some point as well. Maybe finish the game, maybe not. Just depends on what happens. But Alabama's got 2 new running backs they need to come in with to try to break through. But the offensive line's doing okay. They should be in good shape. I think over time they will wear them down. I think this game is going to be close, really, for a half. And then I think it just in time, the depth that Alabama will have will wear out USC. I see it being the experts. I think the point spread's anywhere from 10 points and above. I'm seeing it right there at about a 10-point, maybe 8-point victory. I don't think it gets in doubt for Alabama. I think later in the game they will pull it out. But one thing they do is they know how to win these games, and it's really no big. They've played 8 of these in a row, first big games, and they've won them all. Not saying that's going to happen and that's going to be the record and it's always going to hold true, but they know how to prepare for it. This is all they've been thinking about. So they're going to give them their best. They're going to give Bama their best this first game. But again, I think at the end, Bama's just too talented, and especially when it comes to depth, and they should take the Trojans by about 10 points or so.
Well, I'm going to take you one step further. I think that it will be close for about a quarter and a half. And then I think Alabama is going to win by 2 touchdowns when it's all over with, because you hit 2 key points in my mind. One is the depth. And when we say depth with a lot of teams, what we basically are saying is, hey, their starters are good, but they've got a pretty solid number 2 at every position. Well, Alabama, it's a different story. Alabama depth means their starters are 5-star athletes and recruits, and their backups are 5- and 4-star recruits. And so every other team in the country, save maybe 1 or 2, would take Alabama's number 2s as their starters. And Alabama depth is just a different level. And you're right, their defense, I think, will be as good, if not better, probably better than it was last year. The one thing that and we'll talk about this later on with Alabama, is you did lose a lot in the leadership position there. Kirby Smart's gone, Mel Tucker's gone, Glenn Schumann is gone. I don't think that will hurt them in this game because of the other key point you made about Nick Saban in these type of games. Nick Saban and Alabama don't lose these games. And typically they're not even close in these games. These are the games that Alabama comes out and wins by 20 points, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, they're just as good, if not better, as they were last year. So I'm going to double down and say I think it's going to be somewhat of an easy win for Alabama once we get to the second half. And the running backs will run just like they always do. The offensive line will look great. The quarterback will not matter in this game. Alabama's defense is going to just put too much on USC. And we'll be sitting here in the third quarter getting ready to flip the game to one of these ones later on we're about to talk about.
Yeah, well, I think with that said, let's move on down to the plains of Auburn, Alabama, as you have number 2 Clemson taking on the Auburn Tigers. 2 Tigers going at it, so to speak. They'll start at 9 p.m. Saturday night, September 3rd. And for me, I'm interested on your take with this, but I think this is where the SEC gets tripped up. What do you think on this game?
I think this could get ugly before it's over with. I think that the fact that this is the late game doesn't help fans, or maybe in some ways it does help fans. I think by halftime, most people are going to have turned this game off. Auburn has got so many question marks, even now just coming out that Sean White's going to be the quarterback. I just have seen him operate this offense, and it is the one word I think of him running this offense is pedestrian. There's no threat really with him to run the ball. He is not going to outrun anyone. He's not going to be Nick Marshall and out-juke people and run for 40 yards. I think if Auburn's in a quarterback situation where Sean White is their quarterback, then this offense is not going to be much better than it was last year. Now, the defense will be improved. Carl Lawson is back, and we all know what Carl Lawson can do. The defense will be improved, but there's just not enough offense no matter how fast they try to run this tempo. Clemson is just as good at tempo, and they are uber talented all across the offense. Their defense is not going to be as strong as it was last year, I don't think, at least right away. I think Clemson ends up winning this game by 3 touchdowns, and it'll be over and done with by halftime.
It's really hard to disagree. I don't see a situation unless something happens early. There's a turnover. Obviously, the momentum being home field is going to be there right at the beginning and get Auburn fired up. But I just remember my memory is Deshaun Watson against that Alabama defense last year, which was a great defense, and he just made them look average, really. I mean, he was the team. And, yes, Auburn's got a better defense, and definitely Carl Lawson's going to be there to make a point. I think they will have some stops and whatnot, but I agree with you. I just don't see them, they get up a couple scores real quick. I think it's done. And obviously James Franklin III coming in, Florida State transfer, JUCO transfer, was supposed to come in, and I think he'll have some playing time, but him not beating out. And, again, could be a situation where they wanted the experience over somebody new, and that's where we sit with Georgia and Alabama and other teams. But I believe in that Gus Malzahn's offense. I think everyone has figured him out, and if he doesn't have a running quarterback or a threat runner, it's just you better have good skilled people on the ends. You better have a great running back there or a great quarterback that can drop it in on a dime, which right now none of the Auburn Tiger quarterbacks have shown. And then you see the last 2 years with Auburn and Malzahn's offense just kind of sputter. So I agree with you, man. I think this can get unless something crazy happens, they're going to have to hope that Clemson is just not perfect at all. They're making mistakes. We got a turnover. We got a fumble in their 10, short field for Auburn just to keep it close, because I think once Clemson gets locked in and Deshaun Watson really gets locked into the game, I just don't – I could see this easily being 21 points and over blowout. I don't know what else to say. I just don't see the Auburn Tigers really staying in this game.
Well, you bring up a great point about Franklin at quarterback. I mean, let's go back and look at the 2 times that Gus Malzahn, whether as an assistant or as the head coach, has had great success with this offense. Well, that was with Cam Newton and with Nick Marshall. And what do those 2 guys have in common? It's great athleticism. Now, Cam and Nick were 2 completely different players, but they were both tremendous athletes, not great passers. But in that offense, they don't need to be. They need to be athletes and be a threat to run the football. Sean White is no threat to run the football. If I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm not even worried about him keeping it. My linebackers are as fast as he is, and even if they get full, they can chase him down. So I don't see any way that Sean White is a quarterback for all 4 quarters of this game, especially if Clemson gets up. I think you're going to see James Franklin quickly, and then we'll have a little bit better idea of what that Auburn offense can do with an athlete running the controls. But I'm with you. I think it's a done deal. Clemson's going to win it easily.
All right, so that wraps up the Saturday game. So we got the SEC. We are in agreement of all the games. We got them going 3-1 out of those 4 games. But let's move on to Monday night, September 5th. It's the only game in town. Very interesting. And it's in Orlando. And it's number 11, Ole Miss, taking on number 4, Florida State. This is going to be I think this is going to be a good game. A lot of people have Florida State chalked up, but I wouldn't count Ole Miss out on this. I'd like to just hear your opinion. What do you think on this one?
I think that this is going to be a tremendous game. I think it'll rival that Georgia UNC game as far as the overall quality. I think it'll come down toward the end, but I'm going to go against what most people are picking, and I'm going to go with the team that's got the more experienced quarterback. And in this case, that's Chad Kelly of Ole Miss. Florida State has got a little bit of experience with McGuire coming back, but that's really not who I expect to be leading this team, at the beginning of the season or at the end of the season. I think Florida State's got some questions at quarterback. I think they're a little bit like Georgia. They're not sure who gives them the best option. There's no doubt that Dalvin Cook is incredibly talented, and the offensive and defensive lines are very, very good. But I just feel at the end of in these big games, these cross-conference, big rivalry, national stage games, the cool and experience of your quarterback is what comes out on top. And I'm going to go with what I think will be a much better Ole Miss defense than people think. I don't think the Ole Miss offense will be as explosive as it was last year because the offensive line is not what they were. But I think they'll score enough points, and the defense will put a tremendous amount of pressure onto whoever's quarterback in the Noles. And I think it'll be a lower scoring game. I don't think either team will score more than 20. And I could see it being Ole Miss by a field goal, 20-17 late in that game.
Nice. I tell you what, that's everything you said there is dead on, especially a quarterback. You cannot take for granted having an experienced quarterback. But I'm going to go against you on this one. I think basically it's a home field advantage for Florida State in Orlando. Now, I know recently Ole Miss has gotten a lot of big game experience playing in a couple of Sugar Bowls. They've beaten Alabama 2 years in a row, so they're starting to get used to the big games. But I think it's outside things. I think it's distractions from the NCAA. Maybe not doesn't affect the gameplay, but I think there's just things going on there that are out of their control. Recently, it was just announced that they're expanding, the NCAA is expanding their search for other recruits that went to other schools, giving those guys immunity to talk, which is not an uncommon thing. There was a big to-do about that. I just think they got a lot on their plate. So it can go one or two ways. They can take it as, put a chip on my shoulder, we're going to take care of the Seminoles, or it could go the other way. I'm going to think it's going to go the other way. I do think it's going to be close, but I think overall talent, Ole Miss lost a lot on defense. They really did this past year in the draft or, graduation. And I just think Florida State as a combined unit is too talented. And I think Chad Kelly will end up making mistakes that will hurt him in that game.
Well, Dan, I think you bring up some really good points on the behalf of Florida State. I think these distractions for Ole Miss could be a big factor. And so I think if Ole Miss is going to win this game, which of course, as I said, I think they will, I think that both Hugh Freeze and Chad Kelly are going to have to handle this. I mean, they're the leaders of this team. They're going to have to keep this group focused. And they better have been doing it for the last several weeks, because you're right, it's gotten pretty crazy with this investigation, and it's been going on ever since signing day. You remember the first time we talked about it on signing day. So I think that I just expect those two guys to be able to handle it. I will say this: if Dalvin Cook goes off and Ole Miss can't stop him from running the football, then FSU will win this game. He is too talented, and he has the ability to just run for 200 yards. But I just expect their defense to step up to the case, to step up to the cause, and find a way to pull this game out.
Well, it's definitely a pick 'em. Yeah, I think it's close. I'm not sure what the point spread is on that, but obviously, you and I, that's the one we differ on. But I think it can go either way, definitely. So, and there's more games. Obviously, there's Texas A&M, UCLA. There's a bunch. Nationally, there's some other great games as well. But we wanted to focus on these five. So we basically we're the same way. We all think LSU is going to take care of business. Georgia, Alabama, and then Clemson. On that side of the house, and you and I split the Ole Miss Florida State decision. But either way, it is going to be a fantastic day of college football. I can't even remember a bowl game day with this many good games. So it's definitely going to be exciting.
No doubt. And you made a mention in the beginning of the podcast about how this type of day makes you not want to go be at the games in person, but sit at home in front of your TV. Well, that's my case. I had offered to go to the Georgia-North Carolina game. Pretty good seats at face value. And my final decision was made after looking at the entire slate of games and going, Kirby's first game in the Dome would be awesome, but man, look at what we could do all day long. So we chose to stay in front of the flat screen and eat our own food and not fight the parking and the traffic and all that, to enjoy what you might be right. I don't remember one day with this many big time games on it. So I'm looking forward to it.
You cannot beat modern technology, man, when the bathroom's closed and the kitchen's closer. It's tough. Yep. It's something they have to fight. It's a legit issue. But I agree with you. I'm doing the same thing. I'm sitting in front of the flat screen, and it's going to be heavy football all day. It's definitely going to be exciting. So with that, let's wrap up this podcast, and definitely enjoyed it doing it with you, buddy. And something that you brought up, rapid fire. So I'm gonna let you run with this, and then I'll come in with you. But something that you basically brought up, and I think it's very interesting about how we think the SEC is going to end up looking.
Yeah, well, this time of year, everybody's doing their predictions. We're not going to be any different. We'll have our predictions, but we'll put just a little bit of a spin on it. Everybody says, okay, who's going to win the SEC West? Who's going to win the SEC East? Who's going to win the Big 12, Pac-12, all these different conferences? Who's going to be in the college football playoff? Well, we could do that. We're going to do it just a little bit differently and focus just on the SEC. And first, Dan, rapid fire will be, I want you to give me who you think's going to win the SEC West. Who do you think is maybe a dark horse team to win the SEC West? And meaning, that maybe not on the radar for everybody, but somebody who certainly has the ability to win that side of the conference. And then give me a surprise team for the SEC West that either is going to surprise people with how good they are or how bad they end up being. And we'll focus on the West first. So rapid fire, give me your winner, your dark horse, and your surprise team.
All right, so winner is Alabama. Shock. it's just hard to bet against them until they lose it. I mean, it really is. I mean, people, even national writers out there are just giving up and saying, and it's kind of the same with me. It's just until somebody else can prove it over the season, I just don't, I'm picking them. It's the safe, easy pick. But I'm guilty as charged. Secondly, it's not really, the runner up, but LSU. I mean, it's hard. The West is loaded. And I think Alabama, LSU definitely takes the top. Could it go either way? Sure, but I'm picking Bama. I'm staying with that. I just think at the end of the day, I don't trust I think Les Miles is going to get in trouble. I'm not saying trouble, but he's going to go back to what he knows. And he's a stickler at a certain way of doing his offense, and that's fantastic. And he's won majority of his games, but he cannot win a game like Alabama had to do against Clemson if it gets 40-45. I mean, they're just not built that way unless they're going to show something new. Now, if they do that, this could be completely different. And for a dark horse, somebody's totally surprising out of the West, I'm taking Arkansas. I think the Razorbacks are a throwback team in the West, and Bielema was close. They lose just dumb games. I think Toledo last year. I mean, just things at the beginning of the season, but they give Alabama a run. They beat Ole Miss in a crazy overtime. Bounce goes. The ball bounces the right way and actually put Bama into the conference game with Ole Miss losing. But that's mine. I think it's Bama, LSU, and then Arkansas for the dark horse.
Okay. Well, I'm going to kind of be a little bit different than you, and I am going to go out on a limb with who I think the winner is. I thought as well, like I'm sure everyone else has, that, well, can you really pick against Bama? And I just personally think if there's a year where Bama won't do it, I have to look at a year where on offense there's a quarterback instability, which of course they've had a couple of 2 previous years, but they've had a lot of stability around that. But this year you got quarterback instability, you've got new offensive linemen, you got new running backs, and then really the biggest thing for me is you lose 2 of your coaches on the defensive side and really a behind-the-scenes coach in Glenn Schumann, who a lot of people attribute as the genius behind this Alabama defense. I think if there's a year where Alabama trips up, it's this year. They lose a whole lot. And I think that, again, as you said, the West is loaded. There's too many landmines out there. I just think if I'm going to pick a year to pick against them, it's this year. So with that said, my winner is going to be LSU for the SEC West. I just feel like that Cameron will have enough of an impact on Miles. I'm counting on Miles to have woken up with all this junk that happened to him last year. And I think that there's just too much Leonard Fournette, too much size and athleticism along the offensive and defensive lines. So I'm picking LSU and a little bit of a stunner maybe to win the SEC West. Now, my dark horse team for the SEC West is Arkansas. I agree with you there. I say that, Arkansas is so close in so many ways, and sometimes I want to think that, Bielema is just a clown. I mean, he can't get out of his own way. He's a rock star. He's much more of a showman than he is a coach. But by golly, he knows what he's doing. He's taken too many programs to a good and even better level. I think you got to watch out for Arkansas. If Bama and LSU end up beating themselves up and somebody else trips one of those guys up, Arkansas could be that team that's lying in the weeds to jump in there and get to go to Atlanta in December. Now, my surprise team, and I alluded to it a second ago, is really Alabama. I think if anybody said that I was going to pick against Alabama, that would be a surprise. I think they're just going to stumble. I think they've got 2 losses on their bill in the SEC, one of which will be to LSU, and it'll be that other one that ends up tripping them up, because I do think that LSU will have a loss as well. But Bama's going to trip up somewhere along the way, and they're not going to make it to Atlanta, in my opinion. So that's my picks for the West. Now, Dan, let's move to the East, and you give me your winner, your dark horse candidate that could win it, and then your surprise team that will be either better or worse than people think for the East.
Well, for the winner, I'm going with the Georgia Bulldogs. I think, Richt they're not void of talent. I mean, they won 10 games last year. It's hard to imagine that. You don't feel like they did. But they did. They pulled out that the bowl win and got the 10th win there. They just don't win the right games. The problem with what happened to Richt over time was just perception. They get hyped up for these big games and get destroyed. You just can't do that. And Georgia, and it's very true. Georgia should always be a top 10 team, really a top 5 team, but definitely a top 10 team. The talent's just too much there. There's too much talent. And I think Kirby's going to be able to reel in some of that. I think what's going to happen here is this. I think, and this is not going out on a limb with Georgia, I think you're going to have, Eason come in at some point during the season and take over. I think Chubb's only going to get healthier as it goes on. You got Tony Michel. The arm thing, that should not be lingering. Maybe the first game, but we saw it with Kenyon Drake last year with Alabama. He had the exact same injury, came right back. Obviously, he was out for the time, but once he came back, it really didn't slow him down, and I expect that. So I think Georgia will be clicking, and the tight ends, and you'll have to help me on the tight ends, but I think the tight ends will be back for Georgia, and they got that freshman. And Dave, you're going to have to tell me who it is. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Isaac Nauta.
Yes, I think that Eason to Nauta is going to be a common theme, which will get them past for that. So I think the winner is Georgia. I think they'll meet Bama in the SEC championship game. What's my next one again? I'm sorry. Forgive me. What's my
your
next?
dark horse team that you think maybe other people aren't picking to win the East, but you could see a scenario where they end up going to Atlanta and representing the East.
Well, Dave, I think my dark horse team is the Florida Gators, and the reason is defense. They have a legit defense. They lost some guys last year, but they are still good. I mean, McElwain won on defense last year. They were horrible offensively, but still won the East. And, they have Luke Del Rio, Alabama transfer, starting quarterback. We'll see how he does. I'm not sure. Obviously, he won the job and he impressed the coaches enough. I mean, McElwain can get the Gators ready to play. And defensively, they're going to be in every game. Here's the thing about Florida. Can Georgia stop freaking out and losing to Florida when they shouldn't? Can Tennessee stop losing to Florida when they've got fourth quarter leads how many times in a row and blow it? But that's where I think for a dark horse, I think the Gators could be back in there. So it could be the Gators, as that dark horse team in the East.
All right, now give me that surprise team, something that, nobody's talking about, and they're either or it's somebody that everybody is talking about, and you think they're going to be a lot worse. Either somebody that's going to be a lot better or a lot worse than what people think.
Well, I think it's going to be, you have to say Tennessee, the Volunteers. I mean, talent-wise, they are there, supposedly. I mean, we've heard the same story 3 or 4 years in a row, but I think it's legit. I mean, they gave Alabama all they can handle last year. They should have beat Florida last year. They probably should have been in the championship game against Alabama last year. And Josh Dobbs is a good quarterback. My question with Tennessee and why it's more of a, kind of surprise pick, whatnot, is that with Josh Dobbs, it was an interesting stat, is that last year's games, he starts hot. He's at 62% passing rate, pass completion percentage in the first quarter. And then every quarter after, it got worse. So is that the player getting worse? Is that Butch Jones, the coach, not able to adjust to what the defenses adjust to? So obviously when the game is scripted, you just assume he's on fire. Is that something that he can break, and as a team they can break and finish close games? They had Oklahoma beat last year and they lost to them. I mean, it was just, as a Tennessee fan, it's just got to drive you crazy. But they could easily, get past Georgia, get past Florida, and they're there. But that would be my other team there, and it's not kind of out in the left field. But again, at the end of the day, I think the Dogs get it done. I just think the other two teams have enough deficiencies and they don't know how to win, is what's going to keep them out of the East Championship.
Well, I echo a lot of things you say. I think that if Tennessee doesn't get it done this year, Butch Jones is done. I mean, that group is not known to be a patient fan base. And when you look at the monumental collapses they had last year and all the expectations, preseason ranked number 9, the overall vast majority of both the media and the fans all expect them to win the SEC East and then maybe even really challenge for the whole title in Atlanta. I, for whatever reason, think that this year, probably because the rest of the East has got so many question marks, I think this is the year Tennessee gets it done. I've got them picked to win the East, and that pains me to do it. But I just think that you got Jalen Hurd, you got Josh Dobbs, and you've got a very talented defense. And I think that everything they faced last year, they will find a way to overcome this year. But I agree with you. If they find a way not to get it done this year, boy, that you do not want to be involved in that coaching staff come firing time at the end of the year, because they'll all be gone. But for the record, I am picking the Volunteers to be the winner. My dark horse on the East is the Georgia Bulldogs. And why is a dark horse? I think a lot of people picked them, to win it. Most people thought, okay, maybe it's Florida, maybe it's Georgia. I just think that this is a Kirby Smart type of situation. I think he brings a steadying, rock solid approach, and he brings the process, I guess is what I'm really trying to say. So much with Mark Richt was, up and down, roller coaster. Let's do this, let's do that, and then they fall flat on their face. And I think that Kirby has been preaching the process from day one. And the goal will not be to make it to Atlanta. The goal will not be to win a national championship. It'll be to get better every day. And then there's their slogan they're using, win the day. I think that I would not be surprised at all if Georgia found a way to win this. They will need to win one of those two games, either at home against Tennessee or in the Gator Bowl against Florida. They will both be difficult games. I worry that Georgia will lose that Ole Miss game on the road in Ole Miss. So Georgia is not going to be able to make it with more than 2 losses. But if they can get by with just one SEC loss, I think they'll win a round robin type of comparison. They could be the representative from the East. But they're my dark horse. I would pick Tennessee to win it all. My surprise team is going to be Vanderbilt. I have become a more believer in Derek Mason than I started to. And I think that he is building a culture that's different than what James Franklin was building there. Most people can care less about Vanderbilt, but I think that what he's building is more of a mental tough, grinded out type of team there that is mentally tough, physically tough on both sides of the football. Very much how things were at Stanford, not flashy, but just pound you and pound you and pound you. And I think that type of approach has the ability to trip somebody up like a Florida or a Georgia or a Tennessee. So you could see that Vandy, while they're not going to represent the East in Atlanta, they could be a cause for somebody else not making it. So Vandy's my surprise team. Overall, and I'll finish with this, Dan, and I'll get your answer. Who wins the entire SEC? No matter who it is in Atlanta, you've got Alabama and Georgia. I've got LSU and Tennessee. In your opinion, who wins the SEC championship?
Well, out of those two teams, I'm going to take Bama, and I'm going to cop out. I think any West team that's in there is going to beat the East team. I just don't think. I think there's still enough discrepancy, whether it's LSU, whether it's Alabama, whether it's whoever. I just don't think. I think when it comes to that game, the West team winner is just more, I won't say more experienced, but they are playing tougher competition just at this moment on that side of the division. I like the Western team. In this scenario, it would be Alabama for me.
Well, I agree with you there.
I'm still not shocked, but the Vanderbilt, man, that's a great call. Great call on that.
Well, I agree with you on your comparison there. I obviously have LSU winning the West, and I would have them beating Tennessee. I would also have them beating Georgia or beating Florida. No matter who ended up coming out of the East, I would have LSU beating all of them. I would also have Alabama beating all of them. The interesting thing would be if Arkansas is the one that comes out of the West, then does that change things? Or if it's A&M somehow, does that change things? And I think for me it does. I think whether it's LSU or Alabama, both of those teams would beat an East team. I think if it ended up being Ole Miss or Texas A&M or Arkansas, then maybe my opinion is not the same.
Well, I agree with that. That's a good point. If it's not Alabama, LSU, I think it's definitely a closer game. And listen, anything can happen. All these teams are talented. I mean, it's just right now, on paper, I can't see, especially with the Alabama LSUs against anybody. I just think they're going to have the advantage on that. But great stuff, Dave. I know one thing is we're just ready for some college football. I just love talking with you about it, and I know you and I will get back on this and do a lot more podcasts. And we appreciate everybody joining out there. You got any final thoughts?
No, I think that overall, I think this could be – I'll leave you with this little nugget. I think this could be a year where the SEC could get either 2 teams in or they could get no teams in. I think that when you look at the rest of the nation with your Michigans, your Ohio States, your Michigan States, your Stanford, your Oklahoma, your Clemson, your Florida State, there's enough good teams out there that if they don't stumble, the SEC could get locked out of this championship if you end up with a 2-loss LSU or a 2-loss Bama winning the SEC championship, or even a 1-loss Tennessee, I could see getting left out of the national championship. So what would happen around these parts if an SEC champion did not make the college football playoff. That would be bedlam.
Dave, we appreciate all your insight there, and I just can't wait to watch these games and just the season in general, and you and I to continue to discuss it. And want to thank everybody who joined us on the podcast. Please check out our website at dmbreport.com, where you are smothered and covered in everything college football. Until next time, make every day be your national championship day.